Yeah, good. And this is a wonderful place to transition, because it occurred to me that this talk of multiverse actually does lead us into the idea of different zodiacs in astrology. Okay, and here's my thoughts on that. Number one, I was really excited to speak with you about it because, again, I've never really studied sciences in detail other than my basic, organic chemistry and physics classes in college. But I've thought about these things a lot. And the idea of the multiverse and these different zodiacs, it almost seems like people who use separate, like the sidereal or the tropical or maybe some crazy other zodiac that we don't know about, like they are functioning in a different universe, because you've got one part of the population that says the sidereal zodiac is the most accurate, it is the best because look at my experience here. And then the other people say the tropical zodiac is the most accurate because look at my experience here. And they both believe and experience and see it as perfectly valid. So it seems to me like they're existing in a different multiverse. Now, the problem that I have with astrology is that if we are treating it like science as we treat physics and chemistry, I personally don't understand how we can have two different zodiacs, because that's like saying there's a different constant of gravity, when you're in Europe versus when you're in Australia. So what I want to kind of talk through with you, knowing that this is a charged topic. So those of you who are listening, I understand that you've got your belief systems and your ideas and your experiences about whether sidereal or tropical or otherwise works. We're not trying to prove one or the other here. We're just trying to explore from a scientific perspective, either how can it work that they both are accurate, or is it possible that we do need to try to figure out one or the other, right? So we're just exploring this together. So Nadia, do you have any initial thoughts on this, any initial reactions to this kind of question?
Well, of course. Interestingly, that you twisted this in terms of multiple universes. I didn't expect that.
Okay.
From my perspective, those are just two different systems,
okay.
But they lead to the same exact human being that we're studying, right?
Okay.
And we have one human being with a certain type of behavior and certain karma and certain motions that the human being is going through. And if using two different systems we get to the same result, then by all means, let those two systems exist. Now, in terms of zodiac, it does create a lot of confusion because we say zodiac here, zodiac there. Call it the same name. And back in Moscow University, when we were studying philosophy, we had a topic that was talking about how can you, if you like arguing about certain philosophical, say, issue, a lot of times arguments happen because people call one thing two different terms.
Right.
I forgot the name for that phenomena, but there was a specific name for that phenomena.
Yeah.
You could say, okay, this is like, say, beige, or somebody says, no, this is brown. Essentially, they talk about the same color, but they call it a different name.
Okay.
So, and that might create an argument, and people can argue very heated about the same thing. I find in life that a lot of arguments are essentially where people call the same phenomenon a different name. So here, what happens here is that, we do call it two different types of zodiac, tropical zodiac and sidereal zodiac. And essentially they're shifted by 15 or something degrees. Essentially, those are two different systems, and we should vote for renaming either one or the other.
Okay, so what you're saying is that when people are saying tropical or sidereal, that really it's not that we're talking about the zodiac. It's that one needs to be called something and the other needs to be called something else, not the name zodiac.
So say if we decide that we only call zodiac the system that specifically relates to the physical constellations
Right.
right? So we say, okay, that system has a right to carry the name Zodiac.
Yes.
And a tropical zodiac does not have much to do with the real constellation.
It doesn't have anything to do with real constellations.
We should really rename it.
Right.
We should not call it a zodiac, and the traditional tropical areas should not be called areas.
Right.
Essentially, it's the first house in that 12-house system.
Well, and that's a good.
Called. Let's rename it into, I don't know, Warrior of Spring, for example.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a very good point, but that would only apply to the Northern Hemisphere if you called it the Warrior of Spring, right? Because then it would be the fall.
Okay, forget the seasons. I read your article where you talk about, okay, seasons. Yes, some people relate to seasons, but it's because traditionally it was blended with seasons and with calendar. But essentially, it does not even have to do much with seasons. It's essentially just a 12-house system from the solstice point.
Right, from where the sun and how the sun and the earth move.
Yes, it's a mutual motion of the sun and the earth. And we have the 0 point Aries, which is spring solstice. From that point, we divide a zodiac into 12 houses. And we did call it by the names of the constellations that were there like a couple of thousand years ago, but we shouldn't have. No.
They weren't originally called by that. And you see, like what you mentioned about don't call it Aries or so on.
Right.
It was about 2,000 years ago when a particular Greek said, "Oh, look, there's Aries." Oh, look, there's Taurus. Before that, they would say things like in the Vedic text, Yavna Jataka, they would simply say, "This is like a ram." It wasn't saying this is Aries. It was saying that the quality, the energy of when the sun is in this position, they used the term ram, for example, to describe what that quality was like. But that wasn't its name. It was just a symbol. Right. And so the thing about sidereal zodiac that sometimes I have some difficulty with, I want to pull up a little image here just to show you. I mean, you've seen it, I know, but just for our, one of the difficulties about the sidereal zodiac is that if people say it's related to constellations, which to be honest, I don't think that, again, we have to be careful about our terms here. I don't personally think the zodiac is related to constellations, and here's why. And you can give me your insight from your training. In many of the Vedic texts, it speaks of each zodiac sign as being equally 30 degrees, meaning that each sign is 30 degrees. Okay.
Right.
And when we look at the constellations, the argument that a lot of people make for the sidereal zodiac is they say, oh, well, if you look out in the sky now, Saturn will actually be in, we'll just say, for example, Scorpio.
Right.
And they say, and you can see it because it's the constellation. But what they fail to realize is that each constellation is radically different in size. So like this chart I have here, this shows the ratio of sizes to each zodiac sign, sidereally, like the constellation. And we see Scorpio. I know we're going to talk about the 13th, the 13th zodiac sign too, but we see that the ecliptic actually only runs about 8 degrees through Scorpio, and the rest of it is through that 13th sign. And if we look at the actual degrees of each sign, well, Aries is 25 degrees, Cancer is 21 degrees, Virgo is huge, it's 44 degrees. So I don't understand how, from a sidereal perspective, we can actually say that is the zodiac when our chart, and is it different in Western astrology? Are there some charts that take this into consideration where it's got Virgo at 44 degrees? I mean,
Absolutely not, no. In Western astrology, it is not connected to the actual physical zodiac, to the physical constellation.
But there are Western astrologers. There are Western astrologers who use the sidereal, though, right?
There might be, but not me, because
Go ahead.
I use a tropical zodiac, a simple 12-house system.
Right.
It makes it simple. It makes sense. And my understanding from the scientific perspective is that qualities of people that are assigned to say each zodiac in tropical system. Like I said, 12 house system doesn't need to be called zodiac, but say instead of Aries, we can say first segment, right?
First segment, yeah.
People.
Which is like a ram.
Right, which is like a ram. So back in the day when that system was created, it was noticed that people of that first segment behave a certain way, and the analogy was it was like a ram. Mm-hmm. And it is a primary consideration, and then attaching or kind of assigning near constellations to it is a secondary consideration.
Right.
It became confusing, but it didn't have to be. We could have just stayed with, okay, first part of the zodiac, but assigning names to it probably was done on purpose, so you have an image also, you visualize certain things.
Well, my thought on that, based on, yes, you do need to be able to refer to things, right? So having a name is great for referring to something. Right. But my thought on that was, what if it was like this? What if we had this system where when the sun was in a particular position to the earth, and we're going to refer to that as like the first section or first segment. What if it just so happened at that time that we had those stars lined up? And to make it simple, at that time, people knew that when they looked out in the sky and they saw a planet within that particular constellation, that was just like a marker point to show, oh, well, I know it's in Aries right there, right? That it wasn't necessary, like it's just like when the sun rises at a certain time on a sundial, when a shadow falls in a certain position, that where it's pointing to is just telling you what time of day it is. It doesn't mean that point that it's pointing to is actually the thing.
Right.
Did you see what I'm saying here?
Yes, I totally see what you're saying. So, yes, the attaching the image to it at that time made sense.
Right.
And they probably didn't think, 1,000 years ahead that everything's going to be shifting. But as of right now, and I also wanted to add a little bit physics to it.
Yes, for sure.
Say we're talking about Aries, the first segment, and people's behavior. Why is their behavior is a certain way, right? Why the behavior of the second segment would be different than the first segment? So what we would look at is the actual geometry of the configuration of the sun and earth.
Exactly.
And the angle, that 30-degree angle within which the sun is moving during a birth of a person.
Right.
And we're talking about waves. We're talking about phase locking a person to the birth chart. So with that, the angle would create a certain pattern, certain geometric pattern in a 3D way and to a certain imprint on our DNA, right?
Exactly. So,
yes, there is such thing as we're talking about celestial bodies affecting us, and physical constellations and positions of stars will also affect us. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But I do believe that the angle of Earth and the sun would be primary. Mm-hmm. So, that would be the more like on a base level.
Right.
And the motion of stars over the millennia, changing their position gradually over the millennia, will essentially report back to us and show us how, just like a motion of Pluto, generationally will show us how we become different from 1,000 years ago.
Right.
Right? Making an imprint on our DNA. So we will adjust a description of that first segment, like first segment, the Aries, first segment of that 12-house system 1,000 years ago was probably slightly different than it is now, right? Mm-hmm. And say certain configuration of planets in certain zodiac signs 1,000 years ago would probably be interpreted like, say, a death from plague, right?
Right, yeah.
The same configuration now is going to say, oh, you're just going to have a flu.
Right, yeah.
So
Well,
That's what I'm saying. We have now different interpretations and different predictions than astrologers did 1,000 years ago, because our life is different.
right.
A
Well,
Mercury back in the day could have been just a merchant of like spices. Now it could be a newscaster on TV or broadcaster on the internet, right? Internet did not exist 1,000 years ago. And those slowly moving stars will show us, how our consciousness even progressing into the higher levels of that cake.
well, that's good. And what's fascinating about that, you hit on some really wonderful topics. Number one, at least from the Vedic perspective, there is a school that uses the tropical zodiac, but the nakshatras, or the constellations, which is the lunar zodiac, that they are actually the constellations that we define by the stars. And there's a school of Vedic astrology that says, okay, the zodiac is tropical, but the lunar zodiac is what moves backwards, which are the stars. And the lunar zodiac is said to be the divine consciousness, the divine power as it flows into our physical body of the zodiac.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And so that's why it would change it, because as the divine consciousness is shifting backwards, how it's coming through each zodiac sign is going to be different 1,000 years ago than it is, now. And that's why this school of thought, I think, developed a bit, because there are actual references into some older astrological texts that say things like, well, at this point,
I think that's going to be my favorite Vedic astrology.
well, I want to tell you all about it. I'll love to tell you all about it. But yeah, there's a book that says, at this period of time, this nakshatra or lunar zodiac was in Cancer. But for some reason, 1,000 years or so much so later, this other nakshatra was there. So like they're noticing that these things have changed, right? But they don't quite know why exactly yet. I'll send you the article that I've got on that, and you might appreciate it. But the other thing I wanted to go into from what you said with the physics of it and the angle of the sun, I'm going to share another screen here. Let's see. And this is coming from what I consider to be a yogic perspective. Because I personally think that the tropical zodiac is the actual yogic zodiac. And here's the reason why. Number one, there's an aspect of Eastern culture that says the Uttarayana. When the sun starts moving northward, meaning it's moving back up, we perceive it moving back up towards the North Pole, that is when it's moving towards the realm of the devas, or the forces of divine consciousness. And when it starts moving back down towards the South Pole, that's when there's more of an internalizing energy. And oddly enough, many people celebrate this Uttarayana at the wrong time, meaning they celebrate it 2 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks late, when if you actually go look, it starts at the solstice, right? That's when we see the shift and movement. So if we go back and we know that that's the case, and yoga is very much identified with, in harmony with the wholeness of life, which includes the sun and moon. That's why Hatha yoga is called sun and moon yoga, right? Mm-hmm. That maybe the zodiac and the position of the sun isn't related to stars so much in this regard, but they're related to the chakras. And so if we see this here, this is a really poor drawing. Can you see it? Is it coming through all right?
Yes, I see it very well.
Okay. So we've got the earth here, and then when the sun's influence is moving upwards, it's going to be first down here towards the first chakra, which is said to be closer to the South Pole, and that's around Capricorn and Aquarius. And then it moves up to the second chakra as it's ascending upwards, which would be the second chakra of Pisces. And then it continues up to the third chakra, which is Aries, right? Mm-hmm. And Aries is third chakra related. It's related to fire, initiative, willpower, enthusiasm. And it continues up through the zodiac in this way, tropically. And then when it starts going down, it's way up here in Leo and Cancer. So that's when the sun is as close to the North Pole as possible, which many people refer to as the realm of the Devas. And then we go back down and we get to actual tropical Scorpio. Well, here we've got Mars, a third chakra area, being influenced because the sun is going to be at the position where it's, in a sense, hitting at an angle this part of the earth. So anyway, what I'm trying to share here is what you were saying, that if it's based on the sun's angles, and if we can look at these old texts that say the South Pole is often associated with the realm of the Asuras, or the more worldly, first chakra related things. And the North Pole is associated with the Devic qualities, such as enlightened consciousness and so on. That it's not necessarily the stars that are making this. It's, if we look at the Earth as a chakra system and what the sun is stimulating as it goes through each sign. Do you follow what I'm saying here?
I do. It's a brilliant angle. I have to kind of digest that later. But,
okay. Sorry, didn't mean to dump that on you.
I mean, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Kind of blends with what we've been talking about, but that's brilliant. Yes, yeah. I would appreciate if you send me.
Sure, I'll send that to you. And again, the whole point is, all I'm doing is I'm thinking about the qualities of each chakra, mm-hmm. and how it relates to a sign and the qualities of that sign. And if you can follow the movement of that planet, if you can follow the movement of the sun to the planet Earth, as it's going through its upward phase and its downward phase, it actually locks right into the ideas of the chakras, and then we don't have to pull in seasons. So it works for both the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere.
Right. I think seasons are kind of sort of separate and running in parallel.
Right.
It's interesting that you brought up chakras of Earth, mm-hmm. and we were talking about leaves on a tree, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And, we are part of Earth. We are Earth's children, and again, doing research on all sorts of things, we find that Earth has the same chakra system as we do, right? And in terms of electromagnetic fields and in terms of science, looking at it scientifically, it does make sense once you start looking closely at what the human being is. And it's a beautiful thing happening these days that scientists have now looking outside of their confinement that was set before, and they kind of start looking into all sorts of things, mm-hmm. astrology, past lives, life after death, what they're they looking into all those things. They're doing research, and there are new official articles being released about certain findings, and including chakra systems. Like scientists, for example, come in and measure electromagnetic field of aura, measuring essentially aura. Aura used to be an occult word. Now scientists measure aura, photograph aura, and they measure difference of aura for the person that meditates or sitting in a yoga position, type of thing. And also they measure the soul, weight of the soul, by weighing a body before it's dead, before the person dies or after it dies. Russians do that. Uh-huh. It's official scientific research, believe it or not.
Wow.
But they pretty much have proven the existence of the soul from that perspective. I know it's a little bit robust and primitive way to do it, but they did it anyway. Nevertheless, proven that the body loses weight when the soul departs.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's, that's the fun thing about the time we live in, is all the things that we're able to explore and understand. So, and that's even why when we think about this idea of the different zodiacs, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to just start thinking through, and in whatever way we can, to understand it,
Yes.
Constellationally, which would be more of the idea of the sidereal, or whether it's the relationship of the sun to the earth. I mean, all these things, we often take them for granted. They've just been handed down as though, so-and-so said, my grandpa did this, and so on. And now we're reaching a point in time where I think we can actually take a look at it, and not in a way to be mean-spirited or judgmental to say this is wrong, but just to say, well, let's try to understand it, to see maybe if there's some kind of overlap, or maybe there's something we can figure out from it.
Exactly. And when I'm thinking about like sidereal zodiac, at some point of my life, I thought, okay, I should probably study it to see what it's all about, mm-hmm. and how it's different from tropical.
Right. And
when I realized it's simply a slightly different system, I thought at the point, let me just get good at the system that I know.
Right.
And at some point when I'm curious, I'll learn that system. And my understanding that if I would have learned sidereal zodiac system and say Vedic astrology from that perspective, right, I would probably come to the same conclusion about a human being or my own self. It would be just approached from slightly different angles.
Right.
Sidereal zodiac would probably have slightly different interpretation to each planetary position or configuration or whatever. Configuration probably would be the same because it doesn't matter, but position of the planets.
Right.
And the explanation would be slightly different.
And the configuration is the same.
Configuration is the same. The planets are planets, right?
Yeah. So that, if the sun is 90 degrees from Saturn,
exactly, that would be the same.
It's going to be 90 degrees no matter what zodiac you're talking about.
Right.
And what is fascinating is the overlap. That's kind of what I want to encourage, is more the exploration between the two. Like, for example, you mentioned some of my descriptions on Rahu and Ketu, and how that makes a lot of sense based on, and you didn't find that there was a lot of that in, say, the Western.
No, right.
Right. And there's been aspects of what I've started studying about Western astrology that I found to apply to the ideas of Vedic astrology, like the idea of progressions. I never had read anything necessarily about that in Vedic astrology, and I didn't quite understand it. But the more I looked into it, the more I started to say, well, this is also a very applicable system, to use. So
progressions, you mean yeah. There's a lot of physics to it, and we are talking essentially about harmonics in the wave science and the science of the waves. Just like in music, we have one note and we have harmonics of that note.
Right.
And we have a higher octave or lower octave, and they all, just like in mathematics and computers, there are fractals, right? We have tiny something, and you run a program with fractals, and it creates more and more and more of the same and the bigger patterns.
Right.
And the same thing essentially here with progressions. You can use progressions where 1 day equals 1 year of life, or you can use progressions where 1 month equals 1 year of life.
Right.
The result will be the same.
Right. Yeah.
And you could probably divide the day by 12 and use 1/12 of a day equals 1 year, and the result will be the same.
Exactly. Because of the fractal thing, right?
Fractals, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think it's many, many years from now, but ideally I would like to see astrology turn into just astrology, not Eastern astrology, not Western astrology, not this kind of astrology, just astrology.
United astrology.
Yeah, with maybe subsets. I'm sure there are different branches of physics, sure, but it still falls under the same category, right, of astrology. Like there's organic chemistry and there's probably non-organic chemistry, but it's still chemistry, right?
Chemistry, right.
So anyway.
I would like to see is united sciences that will include astrology.
Yes, that's true.
We're going to have one big tree where every branch is going to have a slightly different something, but it's going to be united sciences. Right?
I think it used to be that way. I mean, that's my thought,
Exactly, right. As they say, astrology is the oldest science, but back in the day, astrology was the science.
Right.
Medicine was a practice and art. Eventually it became a science, but essentially it was a practice and art. Astrology was the science, but that's the only science, and then alchemy, grew from that.
Right, and even from that, though, they were practiced together. Like, for example, when to pick the proper herb for a certain issue.
Exactly.
It would be based on.
Was based on astrology. It was also of the same. When to plant is when the moon in a certain position or something. Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction.
Yes. Yes. Me too. Me too.
Well, this will bring us to the end of our talk today. Is there anything else on your mind that you would like to mention or say before we conclude, or do you feel we've covered enough?
So many things on my mind, but yes, back to the conference. I'm actually looking forward to seeing you at the conference.
Yeah,
I will have a lot of surprises for attendees of my lecture, which is Physics of Astrology.
Excellent.
It's going to be on Saturday.
Okay.
So I know that everybody can make it on Saturday. Some people might not make it on Friday, but Saturday is the day.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be there on yours on Saturday.
It's going to be at 1 o'clock. And I will have a lot of visual presentations, little clips of videos that will visually let people know in much easier format how things work in life, how the universe operates, or how our life works visually, and rather than just with words. That's hard to understand.
Okay, well, excellent. Yes, I look forward to seeing you at the conference, and I'm sure that we'll go into much more other things, kind of discussing other ideas that we have while we're there. So maybe it'll be insight for future videos too. But I want to thank you for being here with me again today. It was always a pleasure.
It's my pleasure, and thank you.
Yeah, and you can find Nadia's website at physicsofastrology.com. So if you want to learn more about her or work with her, you can go to physicsofastrology.com. Otherwise, just stay tuned, and we'll try to do our best to keep bringing you some interesting insights into astrology. So thank you again, Nadia. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.